So welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 107, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Ryan Lee, who's the co-founder and CEO of Nautical Commerce. So Nautical Commerce is a platform that makes it easy for anyone to start a multi-vendor marketplace. They recently announced their $30 million Series A round and are a fast-growing platform that's leading the way and making it easier for more people to start marketplaces. So this is a really great chat with Ryan, where we got to learn more about the founding story of Nautical Commerce, did a deep dive into it as a marketplace platform, got to hear some unique multi-vendor marketplace insights, and also had a really great Q&A for those on the chat. So I really enjoyed this conversation, and I know you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So Ryan, welcome to the group chat. I've been really interested to learn more about Nautical Commerce as a platform and for multi-vendor marketplaces more specifically. So I'm really excited to have you join us here today and dive into things. Before we do, though, I think it might be great if you can start off by sharing a little bit more on your background, though, for those that don't know you.
Absolutely. Well, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you, Mike, for having me and allowing me to chat with the folks here. A little bit on my background. I've got 25 plus years working more or less in the back office. Really at the intersection of commerce and fintech. And then a little bit later on in my career, I had kind of a foray into logistics, and all of this was, in my mind, seminal moments in my career that kind of led up to where we came for Nautical. And so, I started my career at ADT Security, spent 12 years there helping them do digital transformations, mostly, at, the intersection of commerce and fintech, right? Really kind of just getting the billing and money into the door, helping with order management, stuff like that. Moved over to Visa, and I spent 5 years there in innovation, business development, launching a couple different programs for them. And that's kind of where I really kind of cut my teeth in the fintech world. And then Apple called me, last year, of course, at Visa, and said, "Hey, we've got this really cool project. We'd love for you to help us launch. It's super secret. Come over and help." And so I was very fortunate that I was able to join Apple as one of the first three product leaders to launch Apple Pay internationally. And so I ended up rolling that out to about 16 different countries. And my at least focus there, what they call a DRI, as person with directly responsible individual, was the payment service provider. So I ended up spinning up 90 different payment service providers across the world to be compatible and prepare them for readiness on the Apple Pay platform. And it's interesting because our marquee vendors and apps that had to be launched there were a lot of marketplaces, right? We couldn't launch in a marketplace without Uber. We couldn't launch in a marketplace without a couple others that were, like Airbnb. And so, it was interesting kind of sitting there and seeing that. Then I moved over to this company called Turvo, and it was a startup that really kind of focused on logistics. And I realized there what we were doing was we were spinning up private B2B marketplaces with our platform. And that's kind of where I really got my first real foray into building marketplace platforms. After that, I met Lindy, who's on the call with us here, at Moto Payments, because we were building a payment orchestration layer for the most complex payment situations, right? Generally catering to the Fortune 1000, like the, international companies that want to arbitrage, exchange rates and get, preferential rates by passing it down certain rails. And I ended up kind of landing into that most of our customers were marketplaces, and the complexity around marketplace payments was a real thing. And so, near the end of that, and, what I would say is, I had the pleasure of kind of speaking with 35 different, Fortune 500s. 30 of them all said we were launching a marketplace, and they told me there just wasn't a platform, an approachable platform out there, which I thought was absolutely insane. Why wasn't Adobe Commerce doing this? Why wasn't Salesforce? Why wasn't, all these, or even Shopify and maybe BigCommerce? And it just dawned on me that, they were only a part of the problem, right? And what I like to say is, marketplaces kind of sit at this intersection of commerce, fintech, and logistics. It's equal parts. And these systems were only designed for commerce, and they were designed for first party commerce, not third party, right? And enabling third party ecosystem. And so anyway, I'll stop there. That's a bit about my background, and that's kind of how I landed on nautical. So
Yeah, no, that's a really great background on that. Thanks for sharing with us. A lot we can jump into here. So, what was the initial kind of founding story of Nautical Commerce, though?
yeah, it was really just seeing the problem, probably from 2015 on. While I was at Apple, I was seeing a lot of marketplaces, and I was seeing that these projects were massive, and everybody's building the exact same thing, right? Marketplaces operate fundamentally the same. Then of course, moving over to Turvo and building a bunch of private marketplaces, B2B marketplaces in the freight space, clones of things like Convoy, where it's, fully automated versus, more of the manual brokerage type models. It was very interesting to kind of get, peel back the veil of how things move around the world. It's a little scary, actually, and surprising that most of the stuff actually arrives, given the amount of manual work that goes into freight movement. But I think Modo was really where it set for me, and this was that building that payment orchestration layer, because again, I had unfettered access to C-suite folks in the Fortune 1000 that were all wanting to launch marketplaces. And they were being quiet about it. This wasn't where they were raising their hand on their 10K, publicly disclosing that they were trying to look at marketplace initiatives, because right, wrong, or indifferent, they were afraid of the 800-pound gorilla, right? They were worried that Amazon or one of the other marquee marketplaces was going to figure this out and potentially shortcut them or cut them off in the process of launching a marketplace. And they all mentioned that these were multi-year, 2 to 3 year projects, double-digit millions, and they were going to hire this massive tech team to make it happen. And it was just, to me, ridiculous that I was hearing this 30 plus times, and there was no real viable option out there.
I know that definitely makes sense. So I would say most of us here in the community are probably earlier stage marketplace founders. So we're not used to the Fortune 500 kind of internal conversations when it comes to ideating and kind of launching a marketplace. So what does that process kind of look like prior to Nautical Commerce that you were seeing? And could you maybe walk us through some of the steps that they would take to kind of launch a marketplace?
Yeah, it's believe it or not, it's not that different than us, right? And I call us this group of entrepreneurs and founders that have kind of decided to an extent, buck the trend of being a corporate citizen, right? We want to change the world in our own way. Well, there are rebellious corporate citizens, right? And they're also entrepreneurs. And sometimes it comes from the CEO down. Sometimes it's a grassroots initiative. And so these processes are fascinating, because what happens is someone comes up with the idea, and they either delegate it to in terms of the decision making and the vetting to either the business leader who's in charge of the actual marketplace initiative, and this would be like the C. Generally, it's a C-level person. Might be the VP or SVP of commerce. A lot of times it's the CDO, which is the Chief Digital Transformation Officer, or Chief Digital Officer, right? And usually they're flanked by the CFO and the CTO. The main decision maker is really the digital officer or the CEO. And then you ultimately have, the CFO really having significant weight in the decision, because they know immediately that, the minute you introduce marketplace, you introduce a ton of financial risk. And so a CFO is at least number one or number two on that decision matrix, right? And then third is the tech team. And it's interesting, the dynamic, because I'm classically, probably not classically trained, but I'm an architect by nature, right? I still write code to this day, which probably makes my team a little mad. And I wouldn't say it's great code, but it's code. So I would always think that it would be the tech person making that decision, but at the end of the day, it wasn't. They were there as more of a gateway to say yes or no, this passes our requirements, right? Is it cloud agnostic? Is it scalable? Is it secure? Those kinds of things. And so to that point, Mike, when we built Nautical, we went in with those kinds of requirements, which is not the way most Silicon Valley companies build a platform company. They just kind of say, oh, we're going to build it, and we're going to host it on a cloud specifically. We built it cloud agnostic. So technically you could run Nautical on any of the clouds, whether it's Azure, GCP, or Amazon. We haven't had anybody request that, Amazon specifically. I think that's for obvious reasons, but we preference GCP just because that's kind of where we built the proof of concept. But we made it cloud agnostic. The other thing we did was we took a different approach than most commerce companies, and this maybe comes inspired from the Moto days. Is we made ourselves payments agnostic as well. So we didn't lock in a specific vendor. We didn't go with Adyen or Braintree or Stripe. We actually went with all of them. And so we abstracted away the payments and we bolted in all of them. And we made a little micro payments orchestration engine within Nautical, which gives you optionality. You're not stuck with a payment provider and you can scale with them. So I probably went a bit off the rails on that answer, but hopefully that helps.
No, that's great. Thanks for sharing with us. So before we get into too much of the specifics and kind of details of it, maybe it might be great if you can give us kind of like a high level overview of the Nautical Commerce platform today.
Absolutely. So what we like to say is we wanted to, even though we were targeting the biggest of the big when we built the architecture of the platform, we also wanted to empower the next generation of marketplace founders, the folks on this phone. And we wanted to effectively democratize access to this tech that had been previously unreachable, right? And the reason for that really was because we saw the future of commerce being connected. And I think the pandemic's numbers were really telling. If you looked at a commerce company or any kind of retailer that had e-commerce, they grew, their e-commerce business 40%. But if you're a marketplace, you grew at 80% in the exact same period, right? And so it was double. And so, of course, this really created interest among retailers to at least add a marketplace component to it. And so what I would say, and this is, kind of our vision, is we think the future of commerce is connected, where organizations can go into what we call mesh commerce and be able to syndicate and share their catalog amongst one another, right? Clearly I'm a Hugo Boss fan. You don't see it now, but I'm also a Nike fan. I think they pair very well, right? Why, if I'm on Nike's website, should I not also be able to see a complimentary Hugo Boss that when I buy it, it ultimately gets pushed over to them, right? And so what we want to do is lay the foundation to make commerce discoverable, these catalogs discoverable, so you can just bolt them in to your commerce offerings. Whether you're an influencer, a B2C marketplace, a P2P, or even a B2B marketplace, it really didn't matter. And so we abstracted all that away. Why did we do it? Well, everybody on this call knows building a marketplace is hard, and if you really get into the weeds, it can take multiple years and many millions of dollars. And that's all before validating the business, right? That's anti-startup, right? You want to get off the ground quickly. You want to go out and validate your business model super quickly. And so we asked ourselves is there a way where we could make this click to deploy? Almost like Shopify, right? As easy as it is to build, just click a Shopify store and get off the ground running. But during this journey, we learned something, and it's kind of funny. I say this because I think this is the narrative and story of every startup: is you start something, you have this grand vision, and then you stumble on this aha moment, right? And the reason why I think most of these commerce companies just were not being successful is because commerce is only a third of the equation, right? And everybody who tried to build a marketplace was only thinking about the commerce interaction between the buyer and the seller, not necessarily the overhead of operating the marketplace. And so, what we said was, commerce is only this hidden dangers part, right? It's this idea that, you're only focusing on the buyer's experience. Under that iceberg, right, is the idea that you have to do all this other stuff to be compliant as a marketplace, right? You have to onboard vendors, you have to do payouts, you don't pay anybody out when you're a first person commerce system. You just don't have to worry about that. Well, that creates more onus on the marketplace operator to make sure they have their processes buttoned up. And so what we realized really quickly is that marketplaces sit at this intersection of commerce, fintech, and logistics. And what Nautical did was build it in such a way where we put equal parts of the platform across these. And it doesn't matter whether it's a product marketplace or a digital marketplace or even a service, because in our mind, the logistics is really just delivering that product, service, or good, right? Whether it's a digital good or a physical good, doesn't really matter. Digital is more or less provisioning against an actual device or downloadable content, right? That's the logistics of that, if that makes sense. And again, our objective was really about launching an on-demand can be stood up like that platform, so that you didn't have to worry about what we call the plumbing. Really, where we think marketplaces differentiate, Mike, is they differentiate in the buyer's experience and the delivery. They don't differentiate because of the back office. There's nothing special there. Nobody's going to come and buy your company because you're a phenomenal back office. And if they do, that's amazing.
No, certainly. And I think a iceberg is a great way to visualize that. So a lot of behind the scenes that most people don't realize with marketplaces.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what are maybe some examples, of marketplaces that can be built using Nautical Commerce and that you designed it specifically for?
So originally we designed it for B2C. Our first discovery customer ended up being a B2B marketplace, and I'll go into that in just a second because it's actually a fascinating model. We all came to New York. I moved during the middle of the pandemic, so I kind of did the reverse thing. I went from Austin, Texas to New York City, moved my family there. And when we came here, one of our first customers said, "Hey, everybody's trying to get PPE, personal protective equipment, and they cannot get it in the United States." And this gentleman had the ability to go out and procure, like pallets and pallets of gloves, masks, and aprons, and everything everybody needed, sanitizer. And so, he said, "Look, I just don't have a platform to let people discover it." And so he was our first marketplace, and we launched them. We got them up. Again, it was wet cement at the time, so I would say it took us about 15 to 30 days to actually get them on our platform. But he onboarded a bunch of sellers. He was able to make big transactions with state governments, hospitals, universities, and so it kind of proved to us that we could handle B2B. Now, again, he needed things like bulk discount that you just don't think about when you're in B2C, right? You order 100 of these, okay, cool. You better offer a 10% discount. So we had to change the product because we really designed it for B2C. And so going back to the question you asked about like what types, right? Well, I see three different types, right? You got peer-to-peer, you've got B2C, and you got B2B. And then I think there are different models of marketplaces, right? You've got product, digital, service, booking, and what I call listing marketplaces. And these are kind of like directory listings. So like think Craigslist, think clutch.co, where people list their services and someone charges advertising for that. So we can support out of the box in a very strong way, peer-to-peer, B2B, and B2C marketplaces across product and digital. That one we probably 95% can support. And I say 95% because really, we do give you a reference storefront, a storefront kit. It is, MIT licensed. So that means that you guys can modify it and it becomes your IP. And in our mind, the buyer's experience is where you differentiate. And so I say 95% because you're going to want to make a couple changes there and generally get off the ground. So we have launched a B2B marketplace end to end in 30 days. And that wasn't Nautical's work. That was actually the marketplace's work, right? And so their tech was available in 15 minutes after we signed the contract. really it took them 30 days to curate the sellers, to train them on the platform, to get them ready, to get their catalog imported. But they transacted within 30 days. The B2B marketplace that we launched, the one with the PPE, they took their first order within a week. And again, this was, I would argue that it probably didn't have the scale of something like a Granger, but imagine trying to launch an Alibaba or a Granger and taking your first sale in a week. I mean, he already had the captive sellers. We got the products in there. And so it was quite remarkable, the speed to market. The other ones are service marketplaces, booking marketplaces. Right now, we can probably support those in about an 80% way. And I say 80% because like the booking mechanism, we don't quite have down. You'd probably want to use something for booking. But the rest of the transaction we can absolutely take care of, right? There's really fundamentally no difference between a durable product, meaning a reusable product, and that's more like a booking, like an Airbnb or an Uber, versus a regular product. It's just about the time, because the inventory on a booking marketplace really is the time component for that resource. You generally don't want to double book. People don't want those kind of surprises. That gets a little fascinating. But then you have service marketplaces, and service marketplaces in our mind are things like Fiverr, Thumbtack, TaskRabbit, right? Where it's generally labor type marketplaces, or you might even call it a candidate maybe type marketplace, where it's generally a person's time and you're booking it with them. We can probably support one of those in about a 85-90% way. There's still be modifications, and our platform is very extensible. You can absolutely extend it. We do have examples of most of these across our current customer base. I would say, we do have a booking one. We have most of these as our current customer base. So each one has varying degrees of technical capability to extend it. But out of the box, product and digital marketplaces, doesn't matter if it's P2P, B2C, or B2B, we can support it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you've seen quite a bit then, I'm sure, as far as founders and teams coming to you saying, hey, I'm looking to build a marketplace, and here's my kind of typical requirements of them. So maybe what are some of those for I would say kind of like a pared down requirements of a multi-vendor marketplace, and maybe how have these kind of marketplaces evolved, and maybe what some of the I would say like additional kind of functionality and features that they've added 30 days, 60 days, and kind of 90 days after they've launched.
Yeah, I think, again, on the transaction side, the goal with Nautical is to orchestrate a transaction from vendor onboarding all the way to buyer, the buyer discovery, and then ultimately, the ability to, account for and pay out your sellers. So from a feature requirement on what I call the pizza tracker of a marketplace, end-to-end management of it, on the back office side, we've got that pretty much down pat. That's something you don't have to worry about, which is great because you can reassign your critical resources to focus on the storefront. In our mind, that's the buyer's experience. There's three areas where organizations typically, or even founders, really kind of focus on the buyer's experience. One, they either pattern match off of a competitor or some other unique analogous experience in a different industry, right? Where they like that there's a curated marketplace that's spun up around some kind of vertical, right? And so it's usually the look, feel, the experience for the actual buyer, right? The other part is AI and data analysis, ML type stuff. In my mind, that type of stuff is absolutely critical IP that the marketplace founder ought to own. And so we've typically stayed out of that business, partly because it's just an area where a marketplace can differentiate. If we did all of that, there might not be a differentiation. It's more or less just turn a key. If you can curate the network and aggregate demand, you're off to the races, right? Not to say we won't, but right now we just don't focus on that. The other part is really the logistics, that's very important. I think, Mike, if I kind of answered it in with a plus to that answer, is a lot of the problems that marketplace founders focus on are the tech, when in reality the business is more complicated in my mind than the tech. And so we've made the tech so easy, I think, that we found, some of our early customers came in and they were just like, ooh, wait a minute, I didn't have a business plan, or I didn't think this was going to be this hard. I can say this: if you're going to launch a marketplace, this cannot be a side project. You got to put your heart and soul in it. You've got to really make it happen, because, it's interesting. A marketplace operates on lower margins, razor thin margins relative to a regular commerce company, right? Commerce company can sell a product and probably make a 50% margin. Generally, a marketplace is making between, maybe on the high end, 20%, on the low end, maybe 5 to 10%, depending on the industry. And so you don't have the cushion that you would have for inefficiency. And that's why we spent so much care and time on productizing the back office, so that, you didn't necessarily have to scale headcount to operate your marketplace as your business was successful.
Yeah, certainly. And you're emphasizing the logistics and kind of back office. Could you maybe give us some examples of some of the kind of requirements that marketplaces have when it comes to that, and how you kind of productize that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting because most marketplaces, unless they're a referral marketplace or a listing marketplace, they operate as merchant of record when it comes to the buyer's experience, right? So, if you think about, the Amazons, the Grangers, the Alibabas, if you're a buyer in any of these marketplaces, what you're doing, or even StockX, right? What you're doing is you're trusting, and I'll pick on StockX. You're trusting StockX that if you give them money, they're going to make sure that the seller gets you your goods. And so, logistics is challenging in a commerce company. It's doubly challenging in a marketplace, because, if you're a commerce company, you generally control your warehouse or you control your distribution center, and you're able to exert undue force and effort on them to get them to do what you need them to do. In a marketplace, getting sellers to adhere to your service levels, to deliver on the buyer's expectation of the delivery promise that you've made as a marketplace, is all through influence. So you have to manage this through influence, and it ought to be tech assisted. And so, for instance, one thing that we worked on quite extensively was our notifications framework. Right? We want to make sure that every constituent in the marketplace knows that they have something that they need to do at the right time, right? So notifications, alerts, conversational commerce, if you will, had to be embedded into the fabric of the platform. And so logistics is a highly collaborative industry. Just coming from 2.5 years of working in that, it's a lot of coordination. And so we embedded that into the experience. So, again, we like to remove the friction to sell, remove the friction to buy, but also remove the friction to operate. And that operate is really rooted in the accounting and the logistics of that. So
yeah, that's great. That's something that I think a lot of people in the very beginning kind of overlook, or don't fully consider. So cool. So we're going to get into group questions here in a little bit. But you have some really great experience, I would say, when it comes to a multi vendor marketplaces and commerce, of course. So do you have any tips that you'd like to share with maybe founders that are in the earliest stages of thinking through, building and launching a multi vendor marketplace?
Yeah. One, I want to dispel a big myth. One of the biggest myths is that you have to build your own IP to be venture backable. That is not a fact. And I would say that because, what we've done, and we're your advocate here, is we're going around to VCs and telling them, hey, why would you invest in a company that's going to spend 50% of all that money that you invested in on an undifferentiated, heavy lift. Translated for someone like me, a layman, that just means, why would you put money in something that's a commodity? This idea that the back office orchestration is something you put so much money into, right? Instead of just focusing on, the most important part, which is, that buyer's experience and the delivery experience, the thing that's really going to move the needle for the business. So my recommendation is, if first of all, if you're looking for funding, and you're kind of thinking about how you need to think about that, we'd love to talk to you here at Nautical, because right, wrong, or indifferent, we've been through that journey. We've counseled with a couple of our founders, that are leveraging Nautical for their business, and actually helped them raise money by obviously crafting the narrative around what's the most important thing. Bill Gurley said, that the most important thing a marketplace operator can do is to aggregate demand. He didn't say build tech. He didn't say get IP. What he said was aggregate demand. And I would say the marketplace business model is more important to get right on the business side than per se the tech. The tech should just enable the business. And that's probably tip number one I'd give. Tip number two is, at the end of the day, your goal is to deliver an exceptional experience. If you really think about the magic of Amazon, what they did is they productized the invisible. I got to be honest, and I'll throw some shade on them. Their website is crap. As a buyer, their website just looks plain. There's nothing really special about it. StockX is so much better. A bunch of other marketplaces are great. Experiences on the buyer side. What they did is they productized the logistics. They've psychologically conditioned us, to know that if I need something same day or even within 2 days, I can actually get it on Amazon, and it will get delivered. And so, it's interesting because as a consumer, that's super important to me because I know it's reliable, right? And so, when you're launching your marketplace, figure out where you're going to offer a differentiated buyer experience that's going to make you unique. It doesn't mean that you have to compete on price, but you could compete on experience, delivery speed, or, what I'd say assisted buying, right? Or contextual buying, where effectively you're giving them knowledge that they don't necessarily have, right? I get into a lot of hobbies. Sailing is one of them, like sailing boats, and motorcycling and other kinds of things. And if I had a curated marketplace that could kind of guide me through that experience as a novice, that made me feel like I was an expert, I'd pay a premium for that. Because it's a much better experience than me just going on Google or one of these other marketplaces and just searching for products randomly. And I don't really know, is this the best gear? What's the rating on it? Don't underestimate the value of subject matter expertise and knowledge.
Yeah, those are some great tips. And that actually had me came to mind as far as third-party integration. So some of what you're mentioning, there's a lot of other kind of like tools that are out there to enable such a search. So how does the kind of Nautical platform interact with some of the other third-party tools?
So we have a curated marketplace, and I say curated of apps, but I say curated because we've done a lot of those integrations ourselves. And effectively, you just kind of host your key. So for the payment orchestration layer, we did all of the payment integrations. This includes Audience, Stripe, Braintree, Authorize.net, and a couple others. And literally all you do is you bring your key, you pop it in there, and it just works. There's obviously some on the communication side and marketing side. This would be MailChimp and Klaviyo. But one of the things that we did, and this was an architectural decision we took in the beginning, was we said, you know what? We know that marketplaces, are going to live and die by that experience, and we're never going to be able to, in an exhaustive way, offer up all of the apps that every single one of our marketplace customers want. And so we extended our platform through what we call an event-driven architecture. I would argue, if you kind of look at the evolution of architectures, you had kind of service-oriented architectures, client-server even before that, and then it went microservices, right? And so the most cutting-edge systems today have stepped one step ahead of microservices, right? They're event-driven, and so what that means is, it's the difference of checking your email every 5 minutes to see if you got a message versus what happens when you get a text message. It pushes to you. It says, oh, hey, you should go here and look, right? Well, that's what our system does, right? Our system pushes a message to these other platforms, which then can trigger downstream processes and events. And so being highly extensible means that our marketplace founders and their technical team have the ability to extend the platform in a very flexible way.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for sharing with us on that. Let's see. Looks like we have. Hey, Seth, do you want to come on and ask a question?
Yeah, happy to. Ryan, thanks for sharing your time. It's been an area I've been fascinated with, have studied and researched for quite a while. And I'm curious your approach in talking to customers. There are some older vendors, I think, in kind of this multi-vendor marketplace technology, Miracle, Spryker, Webcool, a few others. What's the, what's the angle you're coming at it, and what are the needs that you're solving, which some of these larger vendors, larger platforms aren't solving for today?
Yeah, I think a great question, by the way, Seth. So for us, again, I think this goes back to when I surveyed the market to see what options were out there, when I was talking to those Fortune 500s. And even companies that were looking at, the Webcools, the Miracles, and all that of the world still had 2-year to 3-year launch timeframes. And that to me was, just, I couldn't explain it. I don't understand. If you have a platform, and my definition of a platform is something you can actually run a business on. What I realized is none of these are platforms. What they are an app that bolts onto a commerce platform. The Webcools have done it in a way where, they bolt on and they help you validate your business model, but there's limited scaling, because at the end of the day, you're going to do the heavy lift on the back office. They might help you get vendors on, but who's going to help with the accounting? Who's going to help with the commission and all that other stuff, right? That's all back office. So when we built Nautical, and this is probably counterintuitive, is we built it where we are the commerce platform and we have multi-vendor capabilities on a commerce platform. Miracle doesn't have that. Webcool doesn't have that. They are apps. I would argue there are a couple others out there that have added modules that are marketplace modules. But again, it can't be a peripheral app. What we found is you have to weave multi-vendor into the fabric of the entire architecture of the system, the data architecture, every model, in order for it to operate in a not so dysfunctional way, right? And we're the only platform, I believe, that has done that. We have built our commerce platform around multi-vendor. We don't go out and advertise that we can compete with Shopify and first-party commerce. We could, because there's nothing that says you could be the only vendor on your marketplace. You could do that, but we specifically built it to handle multi-vendor as a platform, which means you can more or less operate it without any other core system as your revenue engine, right? All of these other platforms require Adobe Commerce, Shopify, BigCommerce, or an underlying commerce platform that is not native to that app. And which means that it can break, right? If one of those vendors changes their APIs, that app vendor has to scramble to get you operating again. And that could be downtime for launching your marketplace, or at least operating your marketplace.
Amazing. Thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah, that's a great question. Hey, Ryan. So actually was kind of curious, when it comes to, the time and the resources for, say, a founder to go from kind of idea to live marketplace with Nautical, what does that look like?
So I love this. I love this question. This is one of my favorites. Like I said, we actually had a marketplace go from 0 to hero in a week, right? And that was the one who was heavily assisted by Nautical to get them off the ground. This was our first B2B discovery customer. And for us, that was a great win. because we envisioned a world where you could just do on-demand marketplace and book your transaction within a week. And we say a week because it still takes time to get vendors on and everything else. If it was your own catalog, probably a day, but other vendors a week. So realistically, though, that isn't everybody's, that isn't everybody's path. So what we like to say is we help everybody kind of think through their project in a crawl, walk, run way. This is 30, 60, 90 days generally. And so what we try to target is in the first 30 days, it's really validate the concept, or do a data migration if you're on an existing platform, right? In the next 30 days, it's generally a pilot to validate the business. And when we say validate, like live transactions, we're not talking like pilot test transactions. No, we're actually talking live transactions. And then in the 90-day scenario, that's production. Our goal is within that time frame, get you into production. And we use this same rubric for, it doesn't matter if you're the smallest of the small or the biggest of the big. You, as the marketplace founder and the energy you put into it, dictate that time frame, right? We had a big enterprise, launch their marketplace in 60 days, which was, in my mind, kind of ridiculous time frame, right? They did 15, 45, 60. That was their three-phase approach. And we were able to get them off the ground really quickly. Another one did 30 days, right? They kind of bypassed the whole concept and pilot and said, no, we're going to go full production. Let's just put everything into it. And within 30 days, they did it. Again, they were very convicted. They knew exactly what they wanted and they knew what demand existed. I like to do the three-prong approach, the crawl, walk, run, 30, 60, 90 days, because as a founder, I want to know when I'm on the wrong path as fast as possible. I don't want to say, oh, this will only take me 6 months. Let's just focus, go 6 months, right? 6 months later, you find out, oh, I got it wrong, right? You want to know in 30 days, did you get it right? Which means you can then refocus or you double down. Okay, 60 days, cool, we're ready to go. Right. And it gives you enough time to kind of fix any kind of feedback you get from, buyers, sellers, and any other constituents that operate in your marketplace ecosystem.
Got it. So at the 60-day kind of mark, what are some of those kind of metrics or kind of benchmarks, I would say, that you kind of look for as far as, signaling for, validation there?
100%. Two things we look for whenever we kind of bucket this. First is we want some milestone to be accomplished, right? Something that's tangible, right? In a concept, the idea is getting buy-in either from, if you're the biggest of the big, you want to get buy-in from your buyers or your sellers, so actually get people on the platform, transact in a test way, test transactions, so that, we can validate that the flows work, right? Pilot, in my mind, that second phase, this is about economics. This is about actually booking sales. This is about actually booking revenue. I like to show a chart to folks when we're kind of talking them through the different options of launching a marketplace, and I'd love to kind of augment this conversation with that, right? If you think about this risk model across a project when you're launching a marketplace, right? Let's say it takes you 18 months before you actually get to a point where you can use your marketplace and you've invested, $6 to $8 million in. And again, this is more like the enterprise use case. You don't actually transact until 18 to 24 months. And if you had $100 million marketplace, you just lost $100 million because, per year, right? Because you can't get transactions. Our approach is much different, right? Our goal is within, 90 to 180 days, we get you off the ground, which de-risks it significantly. And the idea is you're able to book revenue faster and get more feedback and make more agile changes than, what we call the incumbent model, which is effectively, let's do this big project plan. Let's launch you in 2 to 3 years. Some of the players that Seth mentioned, do this. This is their rubric, right? They spend 2 to 3 years launching your marketplace, and there's a ton of opportunity cost left on the table, let alone risk. There's a high risk of failure when you wait on a project for 2 to 3 years to launch. whole business could change. So sorry, I digress probably.
No, that was a great visual resource for us right there. So yeah, 2 years. Yeah, that sounds long. I know most of us here in the community operate on, I would say the 15 or 30-day timeline.
Days.
Yeah,
Yeah, days.
at most.
And that's awesome. That's awesome because, this is the spirit by which we built the platform so that you can validate your business as quick as possible and pivot if necessary without, sunk costs. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah, certainly. Let's see. Hey, Seth, or sorry, Scott, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, sure. I just had a question a little bit related to what you were just talking about, Ryan, but also kind of calling back to something you said early on about how, when you're going after some of these Fortune 1000 companies, the decision makers are often some, non-technical folks. And I'm curious how you think about, delivering a platform product where a lot of the folks who are actually going to be hands-on working on implementations and integrations are likely more technical, whereas the kind of decision makers that you really have to sell to and you have to pitch to, especially in that F1000 case, may be, at the executive level, at the 30,000 foot level, where they're not really in those weeds. And I'm curious, like, how you actually think about differentiating the product. And I know you call it a platform, but I mean like the product in the hands-on, like folks who are actually using it. Then, like, how do you think about who you're building for versus who you're selling to, if that makes sense?
Yeah, great question. It's interesting because, to unpack part of the question, why is it that a business user and maybe a finance user is buying a marketplace platform versus maybe the tech user, right? The biggest challenge is if they know what the effort is, or at least what the compliance requirements are to operating a marketplace, then what they do is generally it's relegated to the business user to make sure that, hey, let's check the boxes that we can actually do this business legally in our industry, right? Then what happens is the technical resource comes in and they're more or less the gate that says, okay, they check the box, they're security compliant, they use these standards, yeah, they're cloud agnostic, et cetera, right? So in my mind, these are table stakes that, we just have to adhere to so that, we get a nod from the technology person. And again, the event-driven architecture, I think, helps the tech folks kind of go through and say, you know what, this is extensible. I have a lot of optionality here, so they haven't hamstrung me being a hosted platform, right? And that's usually a trade-off. Is usually it's like, it's hosted. That means I can't do anything with it, right? We unlocked that because we made it event-driven. So why is that the case? Well, it was interesting because what I found when I was meeting with all of these Fortune 1000s is the origination of most of these marketplace ideas. They may have started with the business user or the CEO, but then they immediately got relegated to the CFO. And that wasn't super clear to me immediately, and the reasoning why. Well, it became crystal clear when I was meeting with the CFO and they said, well, anything that has to do with money movement, and when you're in a Fortune 500, money movement is a highly regulated thing. It's, you have to comply with OFAC, the Office of Financial Asset Control, AML, ATF, anti-terrorist financing, anti-money laundering, and a litany of other regulations that exist across the world. And so, you want your DRI, your directly responsible individual, in a corporation to be the head of finance, right? The CFO or some SVP of finance. And so they're the ones doing the check first that, hey, this checks the box. Because usually what happens is if the tail wags the dog and the and the tech people make the decision, they eventually dump it into the finance person's lap and says, hey, you got to do the back office on this. And then they look at it and say, wait a minute. Where's the compliance measures? Where's all the things to make sure that we're moving money appropriately? Oh, I didn't realize that. And that's where it goes off the rails.
yeah, I want to dig in later, and I think I just need to spend some more time actually looking into the product. But I appreciate hearing how you think about, at least making that kind of tip of the spear sale.
100%, 100%. Well, and I would argue the return on investment slides I just showed you, right, are really about, do you want this to be an IT project or do you want this to be a business project? And that two different, I would argue that companies like Sears failed because they were two companies and they didn't have the margins of a Silicon Valley company. They were a tech company because they had this antiquated technology that ran their commerce platform, but they had razor thin margins and they could not fund that. And so they died because their technology just couldn't keep up.
Well, I think we have time for one more question. Hey, Samit, do you want to come on? Look like you had a question.
I want to come on. Hey, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Ryan. A lot of great advice, and also congratulations for the Series A round. I know it's a little bit late, but yes.
Thank you.
I had a question mainly more towards your personal journey. Like, so what was those moments where you really felt, because like you entered into the area where there were already a lot of, like the market already existed, like the player already existed, but what I'm asking is like, what was that defining moment? This is what I really need to build, and I really wanted to solve that. Like, if you can just throw some personal light there. And one more question: let's say if you need to rebuild the Nautical Commerce, let's say going back into March 2020, what is that you will change it while building it? Like, what is that learning that you have?
Yeah, well, first of all, if I knew what it was going to take to build it, I probably would have kind of looked back and said, "Whoa, wait a minute, that's a big effort," because we didn't stumble on that epiphany we had that it wasn't just commerce until I think August of 2020, right? So it was several months in. We really kind of spec'd the product out in I think January, right? So we were a good 8 months in before we realized, wow, wait a minute, this is a bigger hole than we thought. The personal aspect of it is, Samit, I've always been passionate. I spent 12 years at ADT, more or less automating their back office. And we had an army of people working in the back office. I mean, thousands of people. My job was to go in, sit down with someone. I had a very cool job, but very little supervision and a lot of, let's just say, latitude to automate things. And so I would travel around the country and I'd go sit with these people that had miserable jobs, who had to, they got faxes and then they'd be typing stuff into a data system. And so I loved automating the back office, especially things that just weren't value add, so that we could reallocate that resource to a higher value, maybe even a revenue generating function, right? And so my passion around the back office, I realized just how messed up they were. And so, I made a career out of, making the back office more elegant, right? Building beautiful software around, operating the back office. So what I would say is, my personal mission in life is to bring beautiful software to B2B. I don't believe that it has to be ugly. I don't believe that, inherently we had to use green screens or some of these antiquated, Silicon Valley companies that have terrible UIs. And I would argue that, the next generation of business leaders, the millennials and digital natives that are starting to become their own in these organizations and becoming operators, they're not going to have a tolerance for it, when their experience is digital, right? They've been dealing with Facebook. They've been dealing with all of these beautiful buying platforms. Why does the back office have to look like crap? And so, my goal is to bring beautiful, elegant, seamless software to the back office, and of course, marketplaces is a great place to start, because at the end of the day, it really does sit at the intersection of commerce, fintech, and logistics. And it's probably 66% back office. And so our goal is to make that such a commodity that nobody in the world would ever think about building a marketplace without at least using Nautical's economic engine, the ERP part of our platform, to run the marketplace.
Yeah, cool. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. That was a great last question and a way to wrap it up. So, yeah, thanks again for joining us here, Ryan. This is a really fun chat, and it's good to learn more about Nautical because been really interested in learning more about it, and also multi-vendor marketplaces because there's not much that's shared out there on it. So, thanks again for joining us. Yeah, time for kind of a quick plug. Time for a quick plug before we wrap things up, though. Where can we keep up with you and check out Nautical?
Oh yeah, so nauticalcommerce.com for everything about the product and the platform and our vision and where we're going. For me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter. I don't have near the followers most folks, but every now and then I opine. I do share a lot of Mike's stuff on on Twitter because he has really good content. But yeah, you can connect with me. Feel free.
Awesome. We'll have some new founders coming your way. So we once again we really appreciate it. This is a great chat today. So and thanks everyone for joining in and the great questions today.